Okay, so we have a freshly charged battery, a mostly empty SD card. Nothing should go wrong this time. So let's talk about all the books that I read in February. Surprising no one, this video is coming quite late. It's been a busy couple of weeks. I was dog sitting at my friend's house all last week and I have not had time to do much else since then. I've just been catching up on all my life stuff, so here we are, better late than never, and let's just get right into it. So in February, I read a total of 17 books and I DNF'd 5. I had a lot of DNFs last month. Honestly, not that bad about it. I am very much okay with DNFing, but that gave me a total of 5,389 pages with 60.5 hours of audiobooks. I feel like this was, it was a decent reading month in terms of, quantity, but not so much in terms of quality. I definitely had some good reads on here and things that I did enjoy. There's a new all-time favorite in this month, but I feel like a lot of the rest of my reading was just kind of mid and things that I'm not going to think about. Even now, I don't remember a lot of what I read last month, so let's get into the books and we'll start with the DNFs. So the first thing that I DNF'd was A Necessary Chaos. I'm so sad about this. I had the ebook on hold with the Queer Liberation Library for literally a year. A solid year. Started it and immediately did not vibe with it. I didn't like the writing style and I wasn't really vibing with the characters either. And I had no desire to pick it up. My hold was almost up and I hadn't even thought about it in several days, so I just chose to DNF, sadly. Into the Sunken City, it was also quite sad about. That one I had on my TBR since before it was even released, and I think I just waited too long to read it, and by the time that I tried to get to it, I was no longer interested in it. I sometimes like YA, but it's getting increasingly more rare. I was interested in the world of this one still, and the plot was pretty cool, but the second that main character started talking about how hot her ex-boyfriend was, I was out. I'm good, I'm done. And then Cowboy Dragon. I tried to read this one for my Unhinged romance books video that I did that I'll link because there's a bunch of really interesting books in there, so do check that out if you're so inclined. But this one was just a little bit too silly for me and I really didn't like the main character immediately. She was not my cup of tea, and I also didn't like the male main character and his whole pack of dragon shifters. They were all just really alpha bros and it was not my thing. And then I had 2 DNFs for Backless Bash. The first one was Amberlough. This one I think others would really enjoy, but I just couldn't get into it. I really didn't care for really anything that was going on, so I DNF'd that one. And then I also DNF'd the Gossamer Mage. Tony is being so friggin' cute right now. This one I was just really not into the writing style. I restarted this book 4 separate times and could not figure out what the hell I was reading, so I just cut my losses with that one. Okay, I'm gonna move this down so that Tony can have more of a focus because he clearly wants to sit here today. Can you see him better? Hi, buddy. As he immediately moves after I do that. So the books that I have read this month for Backless Bash, I'll just go over those ones really quickly. I'm not going to go into details about my thoughts because I do have a whole vlog on these books, so feel free to check that one out. I will also link that down below. So first up, I read Nocturna by Motayne. I gave this one 3 stars. Bonds of Brass by Skrutskie I gave 4 stars to, and really enjoyed this one. It was so good. And Honor Among Thieves I also gave 4 stars to. I also just want to show off how cool this art is. Look at that. Sentient alien whale spaceship. Cool as fuck. And then for that Unhinged romance books vlog that I talked about that I did for Valentine's Day, I read a couple of things for that. Hi buddy. And again, not going to go into full detail because I do have a whole vlog on those ones. So the first one was Stuffed, which was about a sentient pillow. Yeah, this one I gave 4 stars to. Don't judge me. It was ridiculous. Listen, it was not 4 stars in terms of quality because it was a bad book, obviously. But it was really fun and entertaining and surprisingly interesting characters and premise and kind of well paced, in a weird way. I don't know, it was weird. It was a weird time, but I did actually enjoy it quite a bit. So 4 stars, I guess. Obviously this 4 stars is not the same as these 4 stars, but it is still a 4 star. And then I read Unhinged. This one's about a sentient door that falls in love with a woman who lives in his apartment. This was a whole thing. Definitely a weird one. I gave it a 3-star. Honestly, I might bump that up because I've talked about this book with so many people since then because it's so strange. And now I just have strangely fond memories of this book. So that might be more like a 3.5 or a 4 in hindsight. I also read The Dragon's Bride by Katee Robert. This one I knew I was gonna love. I love this author to begin with. And also monster romance. Hell yeah, I'm very much here for that. This one was fantastic and I gave it 4 stars. And then lastly for that vlog was Morning Glory Milking Farm, and also had a great time here. Again, I know that I like this author. I'd only read one other book by them so far, but I really enjoyed that one, so I figured I would also like this one, and I did indeed. It was great. Again, surprisingly well written and like good pacing and interesting plot outside of the romance stuff that was going on. So it was also just like a genuinely good book on top of being a very strange monster romance. And that one I also gave 4 stars too. And that's it for all of the vlog and project videos that I did this month. So let's go on to all the ones that I read for not those videos, starting with the Ornithologist Field Guide to Love. This one I read with the Cozy Quill book club, and honestly I didn't love this one. It's a historical fantasy romance about 2 ornithologists who are rivals. There's this like competition thing where they have to go and find this magical bird, and whoever finds it will become birder of the year or something like that. It was good and I can see why other people like it. I just personally don't like this author, and I have DNF'd a book from them previously, and had I realized that it was the same author, I probably wouldn't have read it. It was funny though because the whole time that I was reading it I was thinking like, this book really makes me think of that like Wisteria Ladies Guide whatever it's called book, and then after I finished it I was like, oh, it's because it's literally the same author. So they had the exact same tone to them, and it was just not my kind of humor. But again, people who do like that humor I think would really enjoy this book. It was well written, the plot was interesting, and I did actually like the romance in it. The humor was just a little bit outside of my personal taste, and so I gave it a 3-star. And then I read Ring Shout by PJ Clark. This was fantastic. So this book, I've had it on my radar for so long, and I could swear that I had it on my Goodreads TBR, but when I went to go and pick it up, it actually was not on my TBR for some reason, but that is besides the point. So this one I kind of picked up on a whim. I was in the mood for a pretty short book, and I opened up my library app and just happened to see it there that it was available, so I picked it up and I read it I think mostly in one night. And yeah, this was a very well written, very interesting book. Not surprised considering the author. I don't really know what I was expecting with this book, but it definitely still took some turns that I was not expecting at all, and it left me like pretty surprised in some spot. I loved the friendships in here, and the world building was really interesting. I loved how visual this book was. Like the demons were grotesque, and the image that I had in my head was so disgusting. And yeah, this was a great book, and I can't wait to read more from this author. And this one I gave 4 stars. Next up, I read Fathom Folk. It's an Asian-inspired fantasy with water dragons and a sinking city and a whole bunch of cool stuff to it that all sounded great to me. I did really enjoy some elements to it. This was a multi-POV, and most of the POVs I really enjoyed. There was just one character, reminded me a lot of Aguirre in The Final Strife, and I hate that character so much. And the reasons why I dislike Aguirre are the same reasons why I disliked this character in this book. Just some choices that were made that were just frustrating to read, and I get it's because she's young and she doesn't really know any better, but at the same time it's like it was just frustrating to read for me, and I really didn't enjoy the element of it. I don't think that it should have not been in the book. Like, I understand the purpose that her role played. I just personally brought down my overall enjoyment of this book as a whole, and I ended up giving it 3 stars, and I'm also probably not going to continue the series. And now for my favorite book of the month, and also a new favorite of all time. I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir this month, and absolutely fell in love with it. Oh my god, this was so good, and now I'm so beyond hyped for the movie. Oh my god, I can't wait for it. It better be incredible. This one I read with the book club that I joined recently with my coworker. It's an in-person book club, so I can't wait to go and talk to a bunch of people about it. But yeah, so this book follows our main character who wakes up with no memory. He has no clue what his name is, who he is, where he is, but he realizes that he is on a spaceship, and as his memories start to gradually come back to him, he realizes why he's there and what he's doing, and also that he is perhaps not alone. And yeah, I had such a good time with this book. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was not this. And it was just so perfectly my kind of book. It's found family, unlikely friendships, just like all of these things that are such buzzwords for me. And this was done flawlessly. Everything about it was so perfect. It was written so beautifully as well. Even all the science stuff, which I am not a science brain person at all, but this was written in a way where even though it went in depth about all the science elements of it, I didn't feel dumb the whole time. I didn't understand any of it, obviously, but it didn't feel like it was just going over my head. I really enjoyed how this author was able to incorporate all of that really interesting sci-fi elements into this book in a way that still managed to make sense to me, to a degree, obviously. Not fully made sense, but at least sort of. And yeah, I don't want to go into details about why I liked it because I feel like that would be a little bit too spoilery, and people should definitely just go into this book as blind as you can. It was so good. Oh my god. I loved it so much. I obviously gave it a full 5 stars. I definitely want to buy a copy as well and just reread it whenever I want to. And again, that movie, oh, it better be good. If it's bad, I will riot. After that, I picked up The Dividing Sky. This one was okay. I liked the setting of it. It takes place in the future where people can like record their memories and sell them because people don't have the time to go out and like talk to their family by themselves or hang out with their friends or go see a sunset. So they just hire people to experience it for them and then have that memory downloaded into their brain, basically, I think is kind of how it works. I'm not gonna lie, this book has kind of left my brain in the couple of weeks since I've read it. While I was reading it, I had fully grasped everything that was happening, but since putting it down, it's just kind of gone. It was not the most memorable book for me. It was decently written, the characters were okay, the world was definitely the best part. I was very interested in all of the technology, but unfortunately the majority of the book does not take place in the city where all this tech is happening. It mostly takes place out in the wilderness, which was also interesting, and I did like that part of it, but my main interest was in this really cool futuristic world and the commentary that could have come from that, and did kind of like we got some commentary on how the world had evolved into what it became in this book, but not as much as I would have wanted to because again, we weren't in that city for the majority of the book, and the main character also had amnesia, so we just didn't really get a whole lot of what I was hoping for with this book, but it was still pretty good. I just wish that I had known more about it before going into it and could have adjusted my expectations, but wasn't bad. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I will definitely read more from this author in the future. After that, I read The Night Ends with Fire, and I'm not gonna lie, zero recollection of this book at all. I'm trying to even remember what it was about. Oh god. Was this one? Oh, this one was the Mulan retelling, I think. Yeah, okay, so it was a Mulan retelling, and I did like that element of it, but the rest of it I was just pretty mid on. I really didn't like the main character. I found her to be, I don't know if whiny is the right word. This kind of like grating, I guess. Like she was, I don't know how to explain her. Just, I didn't like her personality. She just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I liked what she was trying to do. I liked that she was trying to stand up for herself and have her own agency and that kind of thing. I don't know. I just didn't vibe with her at all. And like, I've definitely seen examples of this type of character before that I did really, really enjoy. It was just this specific character. Something about the way that she would talk to people just really irritated me. And I don't know, just, I didn't like her. That's all that I could say. The plot was okay. It was pretty predictable. The magic was interesting. I did like that part of it. But otherwise, everything else just was kind of there, and nothing really surprised me at all, and none of the characters stood out. Just overall, it was a very forgettable book for me, and I gave it a 3 star. And then we've got Adrift in Currents, Clean and Clear by Shauna Maguire. This is it the 9th or the 10th book? I think it's the 10th book in the Wayward Children series, which is my favorite series of all time, and this is always the best time of year is when we have a new release, even though this came out at the very beginning of January and I had it pre-ordered and I didn't read it until the end of February. My bad. But I read it now and I had a great time with it. This installment is one of the ones where we get the backstory of one of the children and what their world was. This one follows Nadia, who was the turtle girl who pops in later in the series, and we got to see where she came from, and this was such a good book. It was very quiet in terms of the plot. There wasn't some big action and heroic thing going on here. It was a very quiet story that had a lot to do with adoption, specifically international adoption, as well as disability and the agency of children who are disabled. So Nadia is Russian and she was born with one arm, and she was adopted by an American Christian family, and they basically just wanted to look good for their church by saving this child. So they brought her over to America without her wanting to go, obviously. She was happy in her home, forced her to learn English and like no longer speak Russian at all, just like erased her culture, and also forced her into a prosthetic arm, which she had no desire to use because she was perfectly happy and content with her one arm. She had no problems on her own. And then she ends up in her turtle world, and it was beautiful. And this story is really just her kind of finding her own way. She's making her way in this new world that she's found for herself and building a life that she actually enjoys and that she can call her own. And that was kind of the gist of this book. It was very quiet plot-wise, and I love that about it. Because again, with like previous books, a lot of them had to do with like these big heroics and like the main character having some greater purpose in this world and going to save everybody and things going terribly wrong and then having to come back to their home world and that kind of thing. And I love those stories as well, obviously, but this one was just a bit different in that way where it didn't have any of that. There was still like higher stakes in some ways, but they were more on a personal level instead of things that would affect the entire world. And yeah, this was a great read. It was a really good installment in this series, and I gave it a 4.5 star. After that, I read The Deep Sky. This one is the March pick for my in-person book club that I'm part of, and this one was okay. I think my issue with this one is that it read very YA. All of the characters are in their like early to mid 20s for the most part, but they all kind of read very young, and they also have a lot of flashbacks to when they were preteens, so it's like half the book is when they were like 12, 13 years old, and so because of that it just read a lot younger than I was anticipating it to, and that definitely took me out of the story quite a bit. The mystery elements were okay, but just kind of bland. I feel like the answer to the mystery was pretty obvious very early on. The main character I liked, but like was just again kind of bland. I did like the AI ship part of it. That was pretty cool, but everything else was just kind of mid, so not the best read for me. I also gave 0 synopsis there, my bad. So this one is a sci-fi about a bunch of people who have been chosen to go on this like one-way space journey to find a new planet and repopulate it, and it's just kind of their journey on the way there. But there was a explosion on the ship that was found out to not have been an accident, so they have to figure out who did it. And yeah, I don't know, it was just okay, nothing really special to it, but like wasn't a bad book, so it is what it is. I gave it 3 stars. Second from last was Lunay Boy. This one is a very sweet graphic novel about a kid that was found on the moon and adopted into the family on a spaceship, but then his adopted mom gets married and they move to Earth, where he has to navigate being a trans boy and also like literally from the moon and adopted and having like new family and like trying to make new friends and all these things. And during all this, he's also learning about queer culture in Indonesia. This was such a beautiful book. It made me cry. It made me laugh. It was so good. I loved every second of it. The art style was incredible. It was well written. The storyline was interesting. I loved every second of this book. I do wish that it had gone a bit more in depth with some of the relationships that were forming, but other than that, this was a near perfect graphic novel, and I gave it a 4 star. And finally, I read How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. This one is an anthology. I'm pretty sure most, if not all of these stories relate to some of her other works in some way or another. Like there was a story that was set in the world of The City We Became. There was one that took place in the Dreamblood duology world, but the rest of her works I'm not very familiar with, so I couldn't really place where the other stories were from. But these were all super interesting and obviously very well written. I was really impressed with her ability to create really well thought out storylines in such a small space. These were masterfully crafted short stories. They were all so interesting and so engaging. Obviously some of them were less interesting than other ones were, but for the most part, like these were all so good. There was one that I skipped just because I tried reading it a couple of times and I just couldn't figure out what was going on, so I just skipped it. But aside from that one, the rest were phenomenal, and I can't wait to read more from this author. I really want to read like her entire backlog of books. Her writing is just so good, and I want to read more of her long form stuff now, so hopefully I'll do that sometime this year. But for this book, I gave it a solid 4 star. Okay, and those are all the books that I read in February. Very happy that Tony chose to join us for this entire time. Looking so cute back there, all curled up snoozing. But if you read any of these books, please let me know down below. And if not, then let me know what the best book that you read last month was. I would love to hear your thoughts. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys later on.